In this episode, we will discuss the concept of encapsulation in the object-oriented programming. To try and explain what encapsulation means, let's think of a car and the way we operate it. To start the engine, we turn the key in the ignition or press the start button. As a driver, that's all we need to do in order to get the engine running and allow us to move in the designated direction. All this is happening because we have access to a simple interface, in this case, ignition with a key. But behind the scenes, there is a number of events that are triggered when you turn the key. The car is built the way that it provides you with an easy way to start the engine, but it takes care of a chain of events that are triggered after you've indicated that you wish to start it, to which a regular driver does not have direct access. In object-oriented programming, we can make certain properties and methods of the object inaccessible by encapsulating them using visibility keywords such as protected and private. Up until now, we were using the keyword public to precede all our properties and methods. Public visibility keyword allows direct access to a given property or method of the instantiated object, while protected and private ensures that the code that interacts with the object instance, also known as client, does not have access to them. Let's have a look at what PHP documentation has to say about visibility. The PHP documentation says that the visibility of a property or method can be defined by prefixing the declaration with the keywords public, protected, or private. Class members declared public can be accessed everywhere. Members declared protected can be accessed only within the class itself and by inherited classes. In other words, if we have a superclass called person and any of the properties or methods has been declared as protected, then all children will be able to use it, basically the subclasses which are extending this parent class. Members declared as private may only be accessed by the class that defines the member. Again, if we have a look at the person class, which would have any of the properties or method declared as private, then only this specific class would be able to use them. None of the subclasses that inherit from the person will have access to it. And if we scroll down a little bit, class properties must be defined as public, private, or protected. If declared using var, and var keyword was used in earlier versions of PHP, the property will be defined as public. And then obviously we have some examples here. Let's go back to our editor, and I've cleared up everything that we had here. We are starting fresh, so we only have an empty source directory and index.php with the opening PHP tag. The first thing I will do is to create a new person class inside of the source directory. Rather than directory, let's create a new class, PHP class, and it's going to be called person. And we don't have to make it abstract because we can obviously extend classes which are not abstract, but I will because I don't think we're going to be instantiating this person class on its own. It's always going to represent certain type of a person, which will have its own designated class. So I'm going to make this class abstract. And inside of this class, I'm going to start with the public property first name. Then we're going to have another public last name. Then we're going to have public email, and actually between the first and last name, let's add another one, which is going to be middle name. And let's add dog blocks straight away. So all of these will be strings. So string, I'm just going to copy this dog block and paste it above each of these properties. There we go. Okay, and after this, what I'm going to do, we are going to create the method called email tag, and it's not going to be any link, it's going to be just the name, full name, and then in between the angle brackets email address, the way you can see it sometimes when you receive an email from someone. Okay, so public function email tag, and what I'm going to do here first is check if the email property has any value, and I'm going to do it by using the method which we create in just a second called has email. So we check if an exclamation mark, this has email, which tells us that we're checking if this specific instance of the class does not have email associated because it's got exclamation mark, which is doing the opposite of what method actually returns. And if it doesn't, then what we're going to do is, well, let's focus on this has email first. So let's create this method, and then we're going to work with this email tag method going further. Okay, so has email, simply return exclamation mark empty this email. So what we're checking isn't empty email. That would tell us that it has email. Otherwise, we could obviously rename this method and say does not have email, in which case we would remove this exclamation mark and we would be checking whether the email field is empty. But because we're checking has email, which would obviously indicate we are checking if there is any value associated with the property, that's why we put in this exclamation mark before the empty. So if it does not have email, then what I want to do is to return this full name, again, method which we'll create in just a moment, and then we are going to concatenate it with a space and this email replacement. So two methods that we need to now create. Full name, so let's quickly add this one here. But before we write any code for this method, I just want to show you one thing that has just happened. As you can see, our email tag method has a public visibility. This public keyword precedes the function and then the name of the method. But our has email and full name, my IDE automatically made it private. Both of these are prepended with a private keyword. What does it mean? As we read earlier from within the PHP documentation, when we precede the method or property as private, we can only access it, we can only use it from within the class that declares it. So in other words, this has email will only be able to use within this person class. Any subclasses that might extend this person class will not have access to it. They will be able to overwrite it using the same name and the same visibility keyword, but they will not be able to use the one from within the person. So let's quickly do this full name method, and the full name method will implode the array of properties. Basically, we have this first name, middle name, and last name. So three properties that I want to make sure are not empty before they are concatenated. So I'm going to return implode function, and I'm going to implode them with a space. So after each name, there is a space. And then I'm going to use the method called filtered properties. Actually, rather than properties, filtered names, let's call it. And let's quickly write this method as well. So filtered names will simply return array underscore filter. And if you're not familiar with array filter or didn't watch the first season of this series, please check PHP documentation on what it does and how to use it. It takes the array as the first argument, and we're going to pass all these properties. So this first name, so the value associated with this property, then we have middle name, and then this last name. So three items that I want to filter. And the second argument is the callback, which may be of the closure, anonymous function, in other words, or the call to the method of a class. And in our case, I'm going to use the method from within the person class as well. So in between the brackets, first item for this array will be the name of the class or the instance of a class. In this case, it's going to be simply reference to itself. So this pseudo variable, and then the name of the method that I want to call, which is going to be called names. And obviously semicolon at the end. So that's our filtered names method. And let's quickly create this names. It's going to be private as well. Private function names, and it will take the name as the argument, and then we simply return isn't empty name. And that's all that this specific method will do. We'll only check if the given property, property in this case anything, because anything going to pass through as an argument is not empty. And obviously this array filter will make sure that whatever is passed to this method is actually one of these values associated with these properties. Okay, so that's filtered names, and our full name should now work just fine. One thing I'm going to do, however, is to change this from private to public, because this may be used outside of this class or outside of any child class that will extend it. If any client calls, for instance, from within the index.php, that's how we call it. If we instantiate the class here and then make any call to a method or to get the value associated with the property, this is the client call, in other words. Okay, so we've got this full name method. Let's now have a look at this email replacement. Let's add this method quickly. And what email replacement by default will do is simply return null. In other words, we're not going to have anything after that, after the full name when we concatenate. So it's going to be full name and a space, and then we're going to have just null by default. But we will be able to overwrite it. That's why we need to make sure that this email replacement is of a protected visibility, has protected visibility. So any subclasses that will extend this person will be able to implement their own version of this email replacement. In other words, overwriting this method. Okay, so that's the first one. If we scroll up, obviously we need to return something if the instance of this class has value associated with the email. And in this case, we are going to return this full name concatenated with this wrap email method. And we don't have this wrap email method yet, so let's quickly add it as well. And wrap email will simply return, and in between a single double quotes, first left angle bracket, concatenated with this email, and then concatenated with the right angle bracket. And that's all that this wrap email will do. If we now scroll up to the top, our email tag method is completed. But as you can see, it looks a little bit strange. We're pretty much repeating ourselves here, the first part of each return statement. We've got this full name and then concatenated with a space, and the only thing that is different in these two statements is the last method call. So what I suggest we do is try and refactor this to make it look a little bit better than what it is at the moment. So what I'm going to do is create another method. This time the method I'm going to create is going to be called, it's going to be private as well, because we only need access to this method from within this class. It's going to be called name with email, and it will take one argument. It's going to be email, whatever we're going to be passing through as email, because this email replacement should represent something that actually replaces the email. So it's still the name email still applies to it pretty much. So what we're going to do here, from within this method, we are going to return this full name and then concatenate it with the space and the email variable, which is basically whatever property, whatever value has been sent through as an argument to this method. So now, rather than doing this way, we concatenate it only in one place, and we can just use this name with email method, and let's just remove all this, pass this email replacement as an argument, and the same thing will apply here for the full name. And now it looks a little bit better. As you can see, we just delegate this call to this name with email, passing the argument, and that's all, job done. So that's our person class pretty much ready. Let's now add the doc blocks quickly. I'm going to pause the video, add the doc blocks, and get back to you once I'm done. All my methods now have doc blocks, so my class is pretty much completed, this person one. Now let's create another one. Inside of the source directory, this one is going to be called employee. And what I want to do first of all is to extend the person class. So we have access to all these public properties and methods, as well as all of the protected methods and properties. If in my IDE, I can just use the shortcut here to see all of the tree of all the properties and methods. And as you can see, the green padlock unlocked one indicates that it's a public method or property, and we have this email tag as a public method, and then we have this full name method, which is also public, and obviously all these properties. They are in slightly different order than they are actually within the code, because obviously properties are right at the top and methods are followed, but that's how they are displayed in this IDE. And then we have all the red padlocks are private, so we won't have access to these properties anywhere outside of this class. And then the one which is with the key here, this gray key email replacement method, indicates that it's a protected one. Okay, so going back to our employee class. What I want to do here is to override the email replacement method. If we go back to the person, you'll see that email replacement, I'm just going to click email replacement method, only returns null. So we can obviously overwrite it if we want to return something different than just null when we're concatenating full name with email, which we obviously not gonna have in case that where the email replacement method is called. So let's overwrite it by simply declaring the same class within our employee class, our subclass, which extend the person, and it's going to be email replacement. There we go. So this is how we overwrite it again. We have this method with the same name on the person side, but now we want to overwrite it, so we use the same visibility keyword and the same method name. Now we could make it public, and that would be fine, but we could not make it private. You can see automatically my IDE automatically highlights the name of the method. It tells me that cannot make protected method private. Basically, what you can do is to make it more visible than it is in a parent class, but you cannot make it more restricted than it is in a parent class. Obviously, private is more restricted than protected because private completely cuts you off from any other subclasses or client being able to call the method or property. That's why private is much more stricter than protected. We could make it public, as I obviously mentioned, because the protected is stricter than public, so we could loosen the restriction, but we cannot make it more stricter. So protected, email replacement, and what this one will do, simply return, and in between the brackets, no email. And if we do semicolon at the end, put obviously other statement, and then let's add the dog block, return string, and override email replacement method. There we go. Okay, and that's pretty much it for now. Let's quickly go to our index.php, and let's first of all require this these files. So first of all, employee, it's in the source directory, employee, and the next one will be source as well, and person. Actually, they should be in a slightly different order this way. Okay, so now let's instantiate the new employee class. So employee equals new employee, and we don't need the brackets again. And now employee first name, then employee last name, and let's do this middle name as well. I've forgotten. And I'm just making this up because I don't really have middle name. And then employee email, let's set it as info@ssdtutorials.com. Okay, and what I want to do now is simply echo employee email tag, which is the public method. This is the interface that we've got available to us. So we can use any public method and property, but after we've instantiated the class, but we cannot obviously call any protected or private from the client side of the code. Okay, so we have this employee email tag. Let's save it and preview it in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go. As you can see, we can only see the full name, but we cannot see this email within the angle brackets. And this is because browsers automatically think that if you start and end something with the angle bracket, it's the HTML tag. So if we go and view the page source, you see that actually we get everything that we expect to get. So we get full name, then space, and then this email wrapped with the angle bracket. So that works fine. But if we try and remove the email address, I'm just going to comment it for the time being, save it, go back, refresh, and now we get whatever the email replacement method returns. And in our case, we've overwritten the default one from within a person class with our own one under the employee class, which had this no email returned. So if we go back to the editor, let's just quickly have a look at this method again. No email is what is going to be replaced. If we were to comment it for now, If I comment it and just go back to the browser, it will return nothing, absolutely nothing, because the default one returns null. So if we go and preview a page source, you can see we only get full name, and then as you can see there is a space which we're concatenating with whatever has been passed through as an argument. But because the default one only returns null, there's nothing to append to it. I'm just going to uncomment this. If we go back to the browser refresh, now we get the one which is called with this method that has overwritten the default one. Okay, now I want to show you that we actually can't, because obviously I was talking about the fact that we cannot access private properties or methods of the parent class, but I want to show you actually that that's exactly how it works. So I'm going to try and return, for instance, this wrap email method, and as you can see my IDE automatically highlights it, tells me member has private access, and if I try and run it in a browser, refresh the page, and there we go, fatal error, uncaught error, call to private method person wrap email from context employee of the employee class. So as you can see, we can't call it. That's not allowed. And the same thing works. The same thing is going to be when we are going to try and, let's say, echo employee, and I'm going to call email. And as you can see, we don't have anything other than email property and email tag method available to us. The interface only allows these two, because only these two are public. But if I try to call replacement, I know this method exists, but it's a protected method, so we can't call it from within the client. So member has protected assets. So when we've instantiated the object, we cannot call this method. If it was a property, we wouldn't be able to access it either. So if I save it, preview it in a browser, refresh the page, and there we go. We've got whatever has been echoed before we actually called this second method, which is protected. So again, uncaught error, call to protected method from context, and so on. And the same works with the wrap email, for instance, which is private. Obviously, we're going to get the same thing, other than with the only difference actually indicating there's a private method. So protected or private, you cannot access on the object. Protected can be accessed from within the class that extends the parent class. Private can only be used within the class that actually declares them. And before we wrap up this video, I want to add two properties. This time I'm going to make them private. First one will be the number, and the second one will be private property called password. And I'm going to just add dog blocks. They both will be, our first one is going to be an integer indicating the employee number, and then we're going to have password, which is going to be a string. And you might be wondering, how can we set these properties? Because they are private, we have no access to them. If I go back to index.php and if I try and do something like employee number, for instance, as you can see, again, this highlights it straight away because we don't have access to it. It's a private property, you can't access it. So in the next video, we'll have a look at how we can set and get the values associated with the private or protected properties of the given class instance.